Well, good morning, everybody. How are we doing? This is Jeremiah, and you are about to see another Land Effects webinar. This is going to be a fun one. I, uh, I first started working in my dad's office. I believe it was that summer I turned 13. Um, and especially like that summer, the first thing I did was basically run blueprints, but I would do sheet assembly, but particularly a lot of the detail sheets. And back in that day, he had a filing cabinet, and they were all on transparencies. And you take the transparencies, and you would assemble them with Scotch tape onto the Mylar sheet, and then run that through and make a blueprint of it. And he was very particular with his detail library. And then, as we got into CAD, then years later, um, there was just always this appreciation for a detail library. And so I've always enjoyed working on the detail system because it's like my earliest memories, working in that office. And anyway, so this could be a fun one today on particularly on standardizing your detail library, which is absolutely something we see again and again. We've built these amazing tools that can help with it. And so this is going to be a really great little webinar because I just want to let you know how much I absolutely appreciate the value of a detail library. A lot of firms will, I mean, even go so far as to say like their detail library is, the crown jewels of the company. I've heard more than one company say that. So we get it here. So this is going to be a fun one. I have just a really quick housekeeping item here, just letting you know this is being recorded like all of our webinars, but also you are here watching it live with us. So there is a question and answer little button at the bottom, Q&A. You're welcome to click that right now, even get it on the screen, so it'd be a little quicker for you to type a question. But note, you're also going to be able to see the answers that we type to other people's questions. So it makes a great companion while you're on this little journey with us. So enough of my yammer yammer. James is going to take this away. Let's go.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for all the yimmer yammer, Jer. That was actually a cool little anecdote that goes back to your start with details. Anyways, here's me. I'm part of the content creation team, the manufacturer relations team, and the video production team here. And I'll be taking you guys through this webinar today. Keep in mind, we're not trying to show you how to set a specific standard or we're not showing you how to standardize details to our standard or anything. We're showing you the tools you'll need to comply details to your standard or to develop a standard if you don't have one. A quick look at an outline today. This is what we're going to be going through both in the slideshow and then on the demonstration side of thing. I want to put an emphasis today on library level changes. And what I mean by that is the kind of changes that we can apply to a whole group of details at once, or a whole folder or multiple folders, basically a batch, whether you're getting them from somebody and complying them to your standard or getting them ready to send out to a client or something. That's going to include things like layers. We're going to go ahead and discuss how we can manipulate and audit and change the layers at a batch level. We'll talk about text styles, how to update your text and everything, and then also how to do some simple cleanup. We're going to get into more detail on all these. I just want to quickly run through them as like a roadmap of today. After that, we're going to talk about some individual detail level changes. So these are things that you might want to do to a detail in order to bring it up to your standard, but you're going to have to go in to each detail individually to make these kind of changes. So if you're just looking for quick speed, what can I do quickly across the board, you're definitely going to want to take note of the library level stuff we're talking about. But if you're really being particular and trying to make your details as best as you can, then you're going to want to spend some time cleaning up individual details if they need it. And when we're talking about that kind of stuff, the stuff you have to do to each individual detail, we're talking about cleaning up sloppy line work, removing ellipses and splines, removing excess detail, and updating callouts. Now, some of these things might start to get close to the detail creation side of things. So we're not going to necessarily spend a ton of time on these because they can really quickly turn into rabbit holes, but we will at least touch on these and give you guys some quick tips and some guidelines to look for when you're cleaning up your details. Before we jump into CAD, I want to run you through the library level changes, kind of talk about these in a little bit more depth so that when we go to our demonstration on the CAD side, you're not completely lost. You have an idea of what we're going to be going through and kind of what to expect. And, like Jer said, if you're watching this recorded, this will all be time stamped. So if you're looking for a specific answer, you can kind of go ahead and skip ahead. So when we're talking about library level changes, the number one most powerful tool and our main mode of attack, if you will, is going to be BatchMan. BatchMan is an incredibly powerful tool that you're really losing out if you're not using it to work with your details. When we open BatchMan in CAD, we're going to see a basic dialog box that looks like this. The quick immediate thing to note is the files in box at the top. This is going to be wherever, or this is going to show all the files you've told BatchMan to work on. So you can simply add a single file. You can click that button and then navigate to where the file exists. Today, we're going to be adding a folder. So we're going to be working with a folder with 4 details in it. This could have hundreds of details. It can be an existing folder, or it could be something you just got from someone. And of course, you can add whole folders and subfolders. So if you have an organization file structure built out, you can click the topmost file and it should drill down into those other folders. They might seem simple and self-explanatory, but don't overlook the remove and remove all buttons, because if you're working with BatchMan in one instance and you've done some work on some files and then you don't close CAD down and you open BatchMan again, those files might still be populated in that box. So you'll want to make sure you remove anything that you don't want BatchMan to run on, so that you don't run BatchMan twice on it. Moving down, the next important section we really want to pay attention to is this change all section. And we have 2 options here. We have layer names and colors, and we have layer colors. I'm going to be honest with you, layer names and colors seems to be the go-to tool in most cases. It's more powerful. We can use it to do more. So basically the way that works is it's going to open all the files that you told it to above, and it's going to pull all the layers that it found, and it's going to show them to you and allow you to make changes to their names, to their colors, even combine layers. It's really powerful. This other box here, layer colors, it's simply going to allow you to change all of the layer colors. So if you have a client that you work with that has a very specific standard for layer colors, this might be your friend. You can create what's called a GCL file, and we'll show you how to do that and how to use them. But really, if you're going to send to a client regularly and they have a layer color standard that you can just load the GCL file and you're not worried about names. It'll just change all those colors and then you can send it out. You might have multiple clients that way. So you might want to use that the layer colors option on outgoing files. But even then, you might still prefer the layer names and colors. It's just a little bit more involved. When we open layer names and colors, you'll see initially the dialog box on the left. This is going to show you all of the layers that it pulled in the files it looked through, and it's going to show you their current names and colors. From here, you'll be able to rename and color them. If you choose to color them, you'll see a secondary dialog box like the one on the right, and it'll show you the index color, and you can pick color visually or by name or by number, however you're used to working with the colors. Moving on in this dialog box, we have the standard actions. So here we see all by layer, purge plus, text styles, and make a slide. For today, we're not really going to worry about making a slide. That's usually more useful for other types of things like blocks. We really want to pay attention today for details to the text styles, the purge plus, and the all by layer buttons. These are going to be pretty important, and I'll walk you through them really quickly. The all by layer one is going to go through and it's going to set all objects to it's going to set their colors to by layer. This is important, and I'll show an example of why when we get into CAD, but it's essentially going to make using certain tools and functions easier if things are set to by layer. Purge plus is going to go through and it's going to run purge a number of times. What this is going to do is it's going to remove essentially all the junk, any folders, or I'm sorry, any layers that don't have any objects on them. It's going to go ahead and remove those from the drawing for us and really simplify our layer list. And then text styles. You can update the text styles in a group of details, but you want to be aware of how this works. What this text style option is going to do if you check it is it's going to refer to your current preference set, and it's going to pull the text styles from there and then apply them to the drawing. Sorry, I coughed a bit. So it's going to pull the text styles from the preference set and apply them to the details. And this is important because you might have more than one preference set, let's say an imperial one and a metric one. And if you have not checked which preference set you're using before you run BatchMan, you might accidentally run the wrong text styles. When you go to your general tab, you can open up your preferences, and the preference set dialog box will look something like this. This is going to fall a little bit outside of the scope today, but it's worth noting that you'll want to check your preference sets and your text styles here before you run BatchMan. So as long as you are ready for that and you have this set up, you shouldn't have to worry about updating your text styles. Moving down in the dialog box, we finally have the saving options. You can choose no save if you want to just run through some files and you want to preview them and see how the changes look. BatchMan will run through all the changes, but then it won't save them. This might be nice if you're learning BatchMan. There's also the different years you see there. So those are just going to be different file formats. So if you're working with somebody that's using a different version of CAD, or maybe you have a different version of CAD on your laptop versus your computer, whatever the case may be, you can set one of those file formats and it'll save all of the details that you chose above in that format. Another cool thing at the end there, you can see there's a box that says only save if modified. This is nice if you're doing auditing. If you have an existing library and you know some details were updated, but you're not sure if they all were, you can save yourself some time and just go ahead and check the box to only save if the details are modified. So that's going to kind of boil down or wrap up what we're going to be looking at for the library level changes using BatchMan on the CAD side. Let's go ahead and take a look at some individual detail changes. Now, again, these are going to be the things that you want to do after you've run BatchMan and gotten all those mass changes kind of dealt with already. And when we're talking about individual details, we're going to have to go in one at a time and make these changes. What we'll be looking for is going to be first of all, some sloppy line work. We want to clean any of that up. Some examples here of sloppy line work might look like this. Now, these are two different cases, and there's definitely cases that are much worse. I just wanted to use these because they make my point. In the top picture here, those lines are disconnected. So even if you're zoomed out in CAD and they look connected when you're zoomed out far, it's going to create issues for you when you're working or modifying the details. If you try to place a hatch, for example, it's going to have trouble finding the boundary it needs if those lines are not connected. The bottom one, you'll see that those are closed areas. You would have no problem working with hatches. However, when you go to print, those lines that are ending up really close to each other, the line weights are just going to overlap in that gap. So you won't even know that there's a gap between those. It'll just look like an extra thick line and kind of make your drawing look a little less legible, a little less clear. So what we want to do is clean up these little things to make them look more like this. You can see the top one now has a closed area, so you'd be able to hatch in there theoretically. And then the bottom one, we removed the lines and just extended them so that they touch the other object. One advantage to that is you've removed a little bit of object, so you've removed two lines. So you've actually simplified the drawing in that sense too, along with cleaning up sloppy line work. The reason I put emphasis on sloppy line work is because oftentimes you'll get details from other people, like a client or a manufacturer or something, and maybe that detail wasn't generated in CAD. It might have been generated in another program and converted to CAD. And when that happens, you see a lot of this kind of sloppy line work where it's just ever so slightly off, and it can really cause you headaches if you don't have it cleaned up. So if you're working with your details often and you want to be able to modify them without a bunch of hassle, or you're sending them to someone who may need to work with them, you're really saving them a lot of time as well. We're also going to want to remove any ellipses and splines. And when I say remove them, I don't mean that you just wholesale rip them out and delete them. We recommend that you replace them with polylines. Polylines generally have more functionality, are simpler, and tend to have less issues with various tools in CAD. So you can recreate any ellipses and splines with polylines, and we can't recommend that enough. It's going to save you some potential headaches. Another thing you want to do is remove excess detail. Here's an example of too detailed versus a more appropriate level of detail. And what we're seeing here is the versions that are on the top in the red. Those are examples of what the drawing looked like in CAD. And then below in the black is what those would look like printed. Now, I know this is kind of zoomed in, so it doesn't really do us total justice here. But if you zoomed out, you would see the muddiness and the lack of legibility much more obviously if you're zoomed out. But you can see that things like details on bolts, the little lines on caps, any kind of little extraneous items that we could afford to get rid of, we do. By removing the detail, all these little cluttery lines that might be important for a shop drawing or from like an engineering perspective, they're not going to necessarily matter to us when we're looking at something like an installation detail. So by removing all of those extra little lines, we're increasing the legibility, we're making the detail easier to work with, and we're actually streamlining the detail in terms of file size. So it's going to load faster, it's going to take up less memory. If you have a ton of details, everything's just going to move much smoother. And lastly, we're going to want to update callouts. Everyone probably has their own preference for callouts. I'm sure your office has standards for this, or maybe you have to work with different standards depending on what you're doing. But there are some quick and easy changes we can make to callouts, and then there's a little bit more involved changes we can make to callouts. If you look here, we changed the arrows on the leaders to dots in the bottom. That's as simple as changing one and then using match properties to go through and change the others. But if you wanted to change to something like bubble callouts that you'll see a little bit later, that can get a bit more involved, but it's not hard to do either. It's just a little bit more time necessary. So that's kind of the gist of what we're going to be going over when we hop into CAD. But before we do, are there any questions that have come in?
Oh, we had just a comment that they're hoping to see a little bit of a discussion of line types when we get into there, because line types, of course, the LT scale with details can sometimes be an issue. But so if that fits, but otherwise, clean sailing. So let's get going.
All right. So let me jump over here to CAD. Sorry, I went to the wrong desktop there. So now that we're in CAD, you can see here, I've got a few details open. These are going to be our example of a detail library. Now, the reason I chose these details is because they're somewhat already to a standard. You can tell they have a lot of similarities already, and this is going to make seeing changes pretty obvious. So you can tell we're using bubble callouts here. And if we look at some of these lines, we can get a feel for what layers are on. So we've got this green detail 70M layer. So that's going to be like a heavy line weight layer. And here we've got a 50M. If you look over here on the right on the properties tab, we've got this orange line, which is rebar. So you can just see here, we've got some pretty standardized things going on. We've got the detail anno text. And if I kind of go ahead and jump between these details, you'll see a lot of the similarities. This is just going to be helpful to standardize your details in this way so that they look uniform. But right now, the reason I'm showing you these is because we're going to go ahead and monkey around with all of these settings. And I just wanted to show you that most of these things that we're looking at here are consistent already in these details. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and close these down now that we've seen them as an example. And we'll go ahead and we'll jump into working with some BatchMan here. One thing worth noting that I'm not going to save these, but BatchMan will only run if you have one file open. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is close all of these, and I'm just going to open a blank drawing. It's recommended that you use a blank drawing before you run BatchMan anyways, because you're less likely to make little mistakes, forget to run BatchMan on the open drawing or forget to save, or maybe a drawing that you were working on didn't have the correct preference set or something. So what we want to do is go ahead and just open a new drawing. And then if you come up here to your general tab, you can go in here and set your preference settings and everything accordingly. Once you've done that, or if you don't do that, it's going to default to whatever preference set is at the top of your list. So let's say you're wanting to do a metric detail, but the imperial preference set is at the top and you forget that, it's going to default to the imperial one. So just make sure you have the correct preference set. And then if you come over here under sheet setup, you'll see the BatchMan tool. So if we go ahead and we open this guy, we can see the dialog box that we just spent a few minutes talking about. So if I had already had files open here, I'd want to remove those unless they were the files that I'm working on. Maybe I made a mistake and I want to rerun it again, then maybe I could just leave them. But generally, as a rule of thumb, it's a pretty good idea to make sure this is clean and empty before you start running anything. Like we talked about, you could add a file at a time and go through your file browser. You can do a folder, or you could do a folder with subfolders. Today, we're just going to be working on one folder. And I've put that on my desktop for today. So I'm going to navigate to my desktop and I'm going to find this folder here called detail library. Now, by selecting this folder, it's going to confirm that it pulled it in, and it's going to now apply to all the drawings I have in that folder. So those 4 drawings we were looking at earlier, just a moment ago, those are the files we're going to be making changes to. So now that I've got this set up, we can go ahead and kind of get into the meat and potatoes of this. Here is where we're going to want to start. This is going to be the most important thing with our layer names and colors. But before I show you that, I do want to show you the layer colors option because I don't want that to get forgotten. But if you select this checkbox, it's going to open up a new dialog box that looks pretty straightforward. It's got all of the existing colors, and then it allows you to change all the existing colors. If you went through and you edited all of these, you could go ahead and save this, and it's going to create a GCL file, and you could save that wherever you needed. And then the next time you wanted to run to change all your colors, you could just load the appropriate GCL file, and then you're off to the races. You could, just like you saved, you could load from this same menu. You could also, if you have an existing GCL file, but there's been some changes, you could load it up, edit it, and then save it as a new one as well. So like I said, this might not be your go-to tool, but for some people in certain circumstances, that might be what you need to work with. If you have any questions on how to work with these a little more in depth, you can click this help button and it'll take you to our documentation page with all of our knowledge base articles that apply. So if you're not going to be doing that and you want a little more functionality, we're going to come over here to layer names and colors. And this is where we're really going to get most of the bang for our buck today. This will run once I go ahead and I say okay. So we'll come back to this once we close this dialog box. But standard actions, we definitely want all by layer checked. This one's going to be useful for us. We want to purge out any layers that we don't need, and we'll go ahead and run our textiles. Why not? And then for saving, I guess you could choose whatever you want. I'll just choose 2013 for the heck of it. And now when I go ahead and I click OK, it's going to pull up our layer and names, our layer names and colors dialog box after it runs through all the drawings here. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and then we're going to see BatchMan start running through these details. So as it opens these, it's going to collect all of the layer information for us and allow us to make any changes that we'd like. It's almost done here. And so here we go. Now we've got all the layers that it found. You can see from, that's all the layers that exist and then their colors. And then we have the 2 option to change things around. These are the layers we were looking at before, some of the line type or line weight layers. So we've got the 70M, 50M, and these are going to represent their line weight. So a 70M line is going to print heavier than a 35M versus a 13. So generally speaking, you'll want your more fine details, the things that can get cluttery, on your lighter line weights, and then your bigger, bulkier, more pronounced lines down here in your heavy line weights. But because these were consistent through our drawings, let's go ahead and play with these. So maybe we want to rename these, and I don't know why you would rename them exactly this way, but let's say you don't like 70M, you would just wanted to call this one like extra large. And then you wanted to rename these all with their own names. So this one maybe is large, we could do medium, and so on. But maybe we get down to here and we decide that we want to combine these two layers. We can actually just rename them the same thing. So I could rename this one maybe to 13M, and then I can also give them the same color. So we'll go ahead and change their color. Let's make them some bright color. How about this orange? And then I'll make this one also the same color. And so now you can see we have our new name here. So this one's going to change to the same name, and then we have our colors. What that's going to do is it's going to combine anything on those layers to that same layer. So in this case, anything that's on the 25M layer is now going to move to the 13M layer and adopt the same color. And if they're different colors, it's going to run all by layer anyways, so we don't have to worry about that. So now that we've made a few changes, why don't we go ahead and play with the text color, just because that'll be really obvious too. So this anode text layer was the one that had our schedule text and stuff. I'm going to go ahead and change this to some horrible color so that we can see it really obviously. And this 70M layer is this dark green one, if you recall. I'm going to go ahead and change this to a funky color just so that we can see the change. So now we've monkeyed around with some settings, and you could go through and do this however you see fit to whatever level of detail you'd like. If you wanted then to save this setting, you could go ahead and click save. And this is going to create a .lcf file, which is a layer change file. And this is going to be a lot like a GCL file, but it's going to contain more information. So you could create certain settings here, and you could load and save them for different clients, just like you can with a GCL. That's why I say this tool offers so much more than just the layer colors, but the layer colors does have a place, I guess, in some certain cases. Okay, so we're not going to save this one because this is all random, but you could if you had this all, if you took the time to set this up exactly how you want to use it again. But we'll just go ahead and click OK, and it's going to go ahead and it's going to run through these now. As this runs through, you'll see it applying the changes. If you had chose the no save option, it would still run through and do these changes, so you'd get a feel for what they look like, but it obviously wouldn't save them. While this is running through and making our changes, are there any questions we could address?
No, I think we're doing pretty good here.
Cool. Okay, so what it's going to do now is it's going to leave one detail open for us, and now we can see all of our changes that were made. So it changed our color of our text to this really bright pink, and it changed the detail from 70M to X large, and it gave us the new color. And it combined the 25M and the 13M layers, and now this applied to the whole detail library, everything we chose within that file. So you can, or within that folder, I'm sorry. So you can really see the power of BatchMan. You can take these big changes and apply them to tons of details. It's really powerful. Again, I think that the text would update too if I had changed my preference set, but because my preference set has the same or similar text, the text didn't change all that much. But again, remember that if you're going to be standardizing the text, you want to pay attention to your preference set. So that kind of wraps up what we can do with BatchMan, at least from a beginner's point of view. Some things you can do immediately to change a whole batch of details. Let's go ahead, and I'm going to open up another detail that might be a good example for one being not standardized. And what we can do is take a look at some things that we'd want to do in order to clean it up. So let me open this one here. And you can see that we have a detail. This detail looks pretty good on the surface. I've definitely seen a lot worse, but there are some things here that we can clean up pretty quickly. Obviously, the first thing you want to do is proofread. I found this detail, and one of the first things I noticed was enclosure is not spelled correctly up here. Mistakes definitely happen, but when you're getting details from other people, that's one of the first steps you want to take, because if you overlook it, then you're just passing on the typo, and that might not reflect well on you later. But once you feel like you have the text looking okay, let's go ahead and we can select one to see what layer it's on. So we see that it's here on the anno leader layer, and we can go ahead and just turn that off to get it out of our way. And now we're looking at just the line work and this one dimension, which I'm also going to turn off. Okay. So now here's where we have a lot of room to really start improving this detail. If I go ahead and I select everything here, I'm just going to select all of the line work. We can see that we have 234 objects. This is always a good place to start, because most of the time you can lower this number and it's going to improve the performance of your detail. So I can see here how many of each type I have in here. The first thing I'm noticing are these ellipses. Ellipses and splines were one of the first things that we wanted to get rid of. So if you're looking at this and you're like, well, I don't know where the ellipses and splines are, it's no problem. You can just select it all. I don't know why I deselected it, force of habit. And then we can use our quick select tool. So you can activate that by typing QQ. And when you hit enter, it's going to open up our quick select tool. Now, this is nice that we've already run BatchMan on all these, because everything is set to by layer. So we can just switch this object type, choose our ellipse, and leave color to by layer, and it's going to go ahead and snag them. So you can see here in the properties window that it grabbed both of them. So those are the two ellipses in question. If I zoom in here, I can see that there's these tiny little holes for the outlet. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm seeing this on a piece of paper, that's going to be so minuscule, I don't think we even need them. So you could replace those with circles or polylines or whatever you wanted to do. But in this case, I'm just going to pull them out, get rid of them, because they seem excessive. So there we go. We've got rid of two objects. Now let's go ahead and see what we want to deal with next. So I got all those. I can confirm now that I have no ellipses. Let's look at these lines. Anytime there's lines, it always makes me want to deal with them, because they should be polylines. So again, like we did with the ellipses, let's do QQ. Let's go ahead and change object to line, and by layer is okay. Click OK. And now we've got the lines. All 60 of them here have been selected. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to right click and use my isolate menu so that I can isolate these lines. Okay. Now you see here, everything's out of our way besides our lines, and they all are here. There's a couple of ways we can address these. So if we look at this one, it's actually a segment of many lines. So these are actually individual lines that are not connected. There's a couple of ways we can quickly deal with these. One way would be to use super join. So I'm going to type super join. And this is a super, pun intended, I suppose, good tool, because it's going to allow us to select the first line in one of these chains, and then it's going to join all of the subsequent connected lines. So if I just go ahead and click that, now when I choose it, you can see it's a single polyline. And then I can just run super join again on each one of these, and this one's actually connected. So now it's one. This one's connected on the top, and it's now one polyline, where these two are not connected on the top. So now these became two polylines. So already we've gone from 60 lines to a few polylines and a few lines. So you can see here now we're down to much less than we were. These are also lines, and we want to change them. Super join is not going to be our best friend here because they're not connected to much. What we can do here is a number of things. We could just use polylines and draw over them and delete these. But another tip is the tool p-edit. By typing p-edit and hitting enter, it activates the tool. It's going to ask you to select a polyline, but when you select a line, it's going to recognize that it's not a polyline and ask you if you want to change it to one. So you can just leave the little box as yes, Y for yes, and hit enter, and then close this, and now it's a polyline. So if you want to go ahead and just run p-edit on these guys, it's no problem. And you could also run pedit on both of them at the same time. Sorry, I'm having a brain fart here while trying to type and talk. But now that we've turned these all into polylines, you can see we're down to 7 and it's just polylines. So immediately I'm gonna end the isolation here. So immediately we've reduced that number from 235 objects in the beginning down to 171. And all we've done is removed the ellipses and turned the lines into polylines. Now we might want to clean up some line work. So here's an example similar to the one in the slideshow. I can go ahead and trim these out and then just extend these lines all the way so that if I had to put a fill in there, it would be a closed area. And I can do the same for these objects. So I can go ahead and use my trim tool by typing TR, and I could trim out all these little pieces. And then I could use EX for my extends tool and make them all closed by extending them all the way. Again, these might seem like little things that you don't need to do, but if you're going to have to edit this detail later or somebody else is going to be working with it, not only will it make your detail look better to them, it'll also save them time. So while I'm in here kind of looking at this, I'm just really looking for anything else that I can clean up. And I see some of these lines here that I want to get rid of, or not get rid of, but extend all the way. So once we've kind of trimmed and extended and dealt with anything like that, there are the lines that we want to clean up from a detail perspective. And if we look over here on the right side of this detail, we see all these little horizontal lines, and they are on the same layer as this boundary. So the outline of this enclosure here is on the 25M layer. And when I look at these little tiny lines, they're also on the 25M layer. So what that means is when we go to print this, this line, or all of these lines right here are going to get the same line weight, and that's just going to more or less look like one thick line. So you have two options. We could remove all these, or we could change them to a different layer. So you could select them all like that, and you could throw them on a different layer. But I mean, in this case, we'll just go ahead and get rid of them because it's another 39 objects we can remove that we don't need. So now if I go ahead and I select all of this, we've gone all the way down to 132 items. So we've almost cut the amount of items in half. What this is going to do is it's going to lower the file size of the drawing. So it's going to be more lightweight. It's going to load faster. It's not going to bog things down as much. And when we actually need to manipulate this or change anything about it or send it to someone else, we can feel confident that it's going to be a really workable detail. Talking about detail, these are also on the 25M layer, and it doesn't make sense when everything around them is not. So you can select these, see what layer they are on, and we can just put them on a new layer. So maybe we'll put these down on the 13 so that when they print, they're going to have a lower line weight and they won't stand out as much. One other thing I see I missed, I extended these lines all the way and I missed this one. So it's important to check and double check everything as you go through, and not rush. I find a lot of times when I have to work with details, rushing allows me room for error and I can miss little tiny things. So take your time and do it right once. So then it's forever solid in your library and you don't have to constantly revisit them and work with them. Before I move on to talking about callouts and that sort of thing, do we have any questions about line work or detail level?
We've been getting some great little questions coming in, and they're mostly addressed. But one I liked was, "Are polylines preferable to lines?" And that's a great one. I always love, of course, the CAD standards discussions. But I mentioned one of my favorite anecdotes is just hearing of a CAD instructor that really stressed to just never draw lines, always draw polylines. And I think that's especially when you're first learning CAD, particularly, that's why I really appreciate it. I think it's very good to hammer home in people to always draw polylines so that it just feels absolutely fluid to you. That whenever you're going to draw anything, draw a polyline. It's easier to kick that down to a line if you really need to by exploding it, as opposed to having to run p-edit or superjoin to do the opposite. And just anyone who opens up a drawing, if they see used polylines everywhere, they're going to be so happy. And if you used lines everywhere, they're going to call you names.
Yeah, one basic example of the functionality of polylines, just while we're here, is you can hover over the center of any segment and you can add a vertex, so you can make the line more complex, or you can even convert them to arcs and start bending them on the fly. And it's really easy to go back. So I can remove a vertex, I can um, I can convert it to an arc, or I can, like Jared said, just explode it, and now I have another line. So definitely preferable. That's the way I was taught also.
Absolutely. All right. So yeah, moving on.
Okay. I don't know if I ran it on this detail yet, but one other tool you might want to use, and you could do this earlier in the process, is you want to select all of the line work and just go ahead and run an overkill command. And what this is going to do is, I'm just going to leave all my settings stock, is it's going to remove anything that was overlapping, so any two lines. So in this case, let's see if it got anything. It did. It got a couple little things. So we had two lines in there that were overlapping, and overkill caught them for us. So that's just another thing you can add to your process, is running an overkill and getting your line work all clean. So if you wanted to redo these hatches, for example, now we would have no issues. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to type layer on, or lay on rather, and turn all my layers on, because I did turn some off before. And now I kind of want to talk about callouts, because I know these can be so important. I'm going to go ahead and make a couple copies of my detail here so that I can explain a couple different situations. If you're going to update the callouts and you're just going to make, an easy change, you can just select one of these and set it up the way you want, and then you can use match properties to quickly bring the rest up to speed. So if we're looking over here in our properties tab here, one good visual thing to change that's going to make the point really obvious is if we change our arrowhead type. You can see as I go through these, it's previewing them in that drawing in model space, that top one where it says enclosure as specified. You might see that changing. Let's say your standard dictates that you use dots. Go ahead and change that one to a dot. Then you can just type match prop, which is how you type match properties. Select the source object. And then now when you see the icon change and the text change, we can select the destination object. We can quickly go through and apply all these really fast, like on the fly. That's really helpful, and that might be all you need. But let's say your office wants to use bubble callouts like we saw in these details. I personally think that the bubble callouts look a little more clean. There's less annotative lines and less things crossing the drawing itself. And then all of your information is neatly off to the side, not interfering. And you can quickly just read down the list if you need to, rather than trying to move your eyes all around the object to find the specific note you wanted to read. But I understand there's pros and cons to all of these. So one thing to know is if we want to switch to bubble callouts, we need to note and be mindful of our space here. Because the bubble callouts require room for a schedule, we need to make sure that if this detail scale, this detail template we have, is not the correct size, we need to make sure that we remove the details template, make our changes, and then place the detail template afterwards. We need to remove the detail template, place the correct size detail template after we've done that, and then we can place our callouts with the appropriate amount of room. So let's say I deleted all of these callouts because I wanted to redo them, but I think I can fit my details and my schedule, my detail callouts and my schedule in this same template. I can just shift my line work over here, and then I can start moving my details callouts over accordingly, because I don't have to worry about the scale changing. So let's say I wanted to move over to the bubble callouts here. I could come up to the top, and I can come over here to my details tab, and I can choose bubble callout, and it's going to open this dialog box. It's going to tell me this is my note number 1, and I can go ahead and paste the text here, enclosure as specified, and it's going to go ahead and let me place my arrow now. So this one looks like it's up here in this area, and maybe we want to place it something like that. Now you can see it's prompted me to place my schedule. I can go ahead and make a window for where I want my text to show up. And if I place it, oops, I'm sorry. If I close this now, you can see it's here. And of course, I can run through and do each one of these as I need, and then go ahead and move my schedule around as needed. Oh, not like that. You want to grab the bubble callout also. So I can move my whole schedule over here if I needed to. If I thought that I wasn't going to have enough room in this template, which is often the case, I might not have enough room to fit my callouts and my schedule. What I would want to do is delete my existing template here and all my callouts, and then I would want to place a new template that is going to be the correct size. So I can use our detail template tool here, and I can select the size and the scale I need, or I can just say okay. And if I think I press K to pull up the keyboard commands here, I can change the template on the fly according to these keys. So I can change my scale with the E key and the Q key, and I can change my formatting size. So if I go ahead and place a new one, I might scale up using my E key until I find one that looks appropriate. And you know, this is the same size that we were using here. But let's say you think you needed a little more room, you could go ahead and press D, which again would bump out to a wider format, and now you'd have plenty of room. In this case, for this detail, if I were to go ahead and do all the bubble callouts, I feel like they would fit just fine. I just wanted to note that because if you're switching from some other kind of callout to a bubble callout system, you'll want to note your space and your template, because your template is going to set the scale. So if you're using the same template, you're good to go. But if you think you need more room, you want to change your template before you place all your bubble callouts. Is there any other questions regarding callouts, Jer?
No, I think we're good.
Okay, well that wraps up basically all of the basics that I wanted to touch on. We could go into more depth on any of these cleaning techniques if we needed to. Is there anything else that we want to touch on? Well, we have a few minutes to spare.
Gosh, it's a good one. Definitely, the one that just coming to my mind real quick is just definitely to remind people that BatchMan, particularly, and since it is such a central role in this, um, is every feature in there you have to appreciate, like, gee, because the dialog box in my mind is a little chaotic, if I may. Sometimes whenever I look at that dialog box, I'm like, God, I'd love to clean it up a bit. So like that's on the list, but it's because a user is like, hey, it'd be neat if Batchman could do this, and another, oh, it'd be neat if this, and these options get piled on and piled on and piled on, and and it gets more and more. And so for like the standard actions area particularly, that purge plus has a lot of power behind it. The text styles was always intended to have a dim styles also added in there, so it's actually purposely why that little area is a little sparsely open, because it was purposely left room for a dim styles, which was assumed to also be added there. And then, of course, people also want M leader styles. And so there's talk of adding that there as well. So, long story short, saying there's plenty of future capability that can be added to Batchman that we actually already have kind of noted for it. So always feel free to let us know what would you like to do with it. For instance, something came up in the chat regarding the M leader alignments. So that would be absolutely something. And then also Chris just chimed in the questions with what does the Lisp option do? And that does, as what you might imagine, it just simply loads a Lisp file for each of those files. So that lets you push any number of additional custom tweaking or code to a additional Lisp file. So it really, really is a powerful tool. But that, so as you get into using it, let us know little challenges that you have with it. And then I see also Michael just chimed in asking about the Purge Plus option. We ended up naming it that. If you hit the help button there to users, always reminding you that that'll walk you through everything. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to have a basic drawing cleanup capability. So that Purge Plus is a Purge Plus audit, basically. So it will audit the drawing, purge it, and do some other real general sort of cleanup options. So always a nice first pass at like a whole detail library or a whole bunch of files that you get from someone. But let's see here if we got any. Oh, we got a few other questions coming in. Like Jeff asks, how often should you run purge? When you're first getting a file, for sure. Like you don't have to purge an active design file every day, for instance. That's not so necessary. But as part of a drawing cleanup, you absolutely want to purge a file that you get. And also this, if you're just looking at an old detail like this, oh, I'm cleaning up this old detail. No harm in purging that. Absolutely. Just immediately do a purge all. Purge to absolutely get whatever is in there, out. It's so many things that you'll find in a detail. But I am babbling away. What else do we have, James?
I mean, we've covered everything that we outlined. I thought that there might be more heavy questions on this one, but I see in the chat you guys took care of a lot of them as they came up. So we're a little bit ahead of schedule. We can look at any other detail cleanup things we'd like. We have a few minutes.
Yeah, and we still got a couple great questions, so I'm happy also just to continue to address questions. With someone else mentioned something they'd like to see would be swapping out the scale or pattern to unify across details. And so that was particularly regarding hatches, I'm sorry, but regarding, hatches. And so that's a good idea too. So very similar to text styles or colors and layers, to be able to scan through a bunch of details, and then it says, here's all the hatches that you have in all of those details, to let you have a little more control of that. I really like that idea. So thank you for that idea. That's exactly what we're after. Love ideas like that, because you absolutely get that. You'll run through all of your you'll run through a hatch or a detail library, or more often, right? You'll just go to print something and then just some detail like, what is this black blob here in this detail, right? And you're like, what hatch is that? And who knows, some really random hatch put in by some random employee years ago, and it's just still in there, and you're like, okay, yeah, I don't want to use that strange hatch for concrete. We always want to use these standard concrete hatches, and so on. So absolutely a great question.
Another thing I forgot to mention about hatches, when I was talking about bubble callouts, if you're gonna need more space and use a different template, you want to place the template before you place all of your bubble callouts so they scale properly. You want to do that with your hatches as well. If you just don't change the hatches, the scale is going to be off. So just like with your notes from your callouts, you'll want to copy those over after you place the new detail template as well.
Exactly. And Mason here also chimed in with a question, admitting, saying it is separate from details, but just asking about BatchMan, if it might be able to do something to clean up XREFs. And that's a great question. Just want to mention that we actually are talking about doing an entire webinar on drawing cleanup. And so we would go over that. Basically, the short answer would be no. As much as I would love to have something automated, well, okay, fine print there. Basically, when you get a bunch of XREFs, as much as I'd love to do things automated, you still got to open up every one individually. It just, you have to. just to see what's going on. There's just it's impossible to say that I'm going to automatically be able to unwind whatever madness I was sent, right? Because some of these xrefs are nested. You would be shocked to see how many times someone sends us a file like, I don't know what's going on with this xref, and it has a circular reference in the xref, and we're like, well, there's your problem, right? Who sent this to you? What is this? So you kind of just have to go through the xrefs one at a time to just make sense of them, and then kind of go from there. But yes, some people have said, for instance, one thing he likes to do is he likes to open up each xref, rips out all of the layout tabs, detaches all xrefs within it, and then does basic cleanup and then saves it as such. And I thought that was actually a neat process. So that is something that was like, oh, I kind of like that as something that maybe BatchMan could do. So it's, a nice first pass across all those xrefs. But the downside of that, of course, is just like I was saying, you now don't know how they all go back together. You've effectively taken a puzzle and exploded it. And so which xref is supposed to go into which one? Are you just going to now attach all 12 of them? You've lost that hierarchy of them. So it's so basically the short answer is, yeah, there is some, but we're just a little wary with having BatchMan portend to be this one click to all your xref magic. Xrefs take time to go through and clean up, and it just, you have to build that in. So that's the main point I wanted to stress. But see, here I am babbling again. What do you think, James? I think we should just call it so that I can go get another cup of coffee.
Sounds good to me.
Well, hey everyone, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. Keep a lot of these great ideas coming, of course, and we will catch you at the next webinar.
Thank you.